Imagine waking to a dawn so bright it sets castle walls ablaze with gold, yet knowing the same sun will one day glow red over your own scaffold. Margaret Pole's life is that impossible paradox: born, Plantagenet princess, remade Tudor pawn, finally immortalized as a martyr whose blood once threatened a king. In an England still echoing with the clamor of the Wars of the Roses, Margaret survives betrayal, exile, and widowhood to rise as Countess of Salisbury, one of the richest power brokers at Henry VIII's court. But royal favor is fickle, and when her son, Cardinal Reginald Pole, dares defy the king's break with Rome, the quiet matriarch becomes enemy number one. Imprisoned without trial, she confronts the acts with a courage that will horrify witnesses and echo through centuries. Tonight, we plunge into the intrigue, faith, and savage politics that forged and destroyed the last great Plantagenet woman. Stay with us, because her story rewrites everything you thought you knew about the Tudors. On a summer morning in 1473, the sky above Farleigh Castle glowed with clouds streaked in gold, heralding the birth of Margaret Pole. Born to George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, and Isabel Neville, Margaret entered the world with the weight of royal blood and the shadow of a crumbling dynasty. The Plantagenets, once the iron spine of England's monarchy, were fracturing under ambition, betrayal, and the relentless churn of power. Margaret's life, from her first breath, was destined to be a tapestry woven with privilege and peril, where survival demanded resilience and every step carried the risk of ruin. Margaret's father, George, was a man of contradictions, brother to King Edward IV, a duke of immense influence, yet a figure undone by his own reckless ambition. His proximity to the throne fueled a dangerous cocktail of paranoia, pride, and indulgence. When Isabel died in 1476, George's grief twisted into madness. He accused a maid, Anchoret Twiniho, of poisoning his wife and orchestrated a sham trial that ended in her execution. This act of vengeance was only the beginning of his spiral. Convinced of plots against him, George's accusations of treason and disloyalty turned inward, targeting the very crown he served. By 1478, his brother Edward, weary of George's instability, ordered his private execution. Legend claims George was drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine, a grim, if apocryphal, end for a duke. Whether true or not, the stain of treason clung to the Plantagenet name, stripping Margaret, not yet 5, and her brother Edward of their father's titles, lands, and protection. Orphaned in all but name, her mother dead and her father branded a traitor, Margaret and Edward became wards of a court that viewed them with suspicion. They were Plantagenets in a world increasingly hostile to their lineage, relics of a dynasty that had ruled England for centuries, but now teetered on the edge of oblivion. The death of Edward IV in 1483 plunged England into chaos. His young sons, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, the princes in the Tower, vanished under the shadow of their uncle Richard III, who seized the crown. With the princes presumed dead, Margaret and her brother, Edward, as surviving Plantagenets, were uncomfortably close to the throne. Richard III, wary of their claim, confined Edward to the Tower, while Margaret, still a child, was shuffled between noble households, a royal orphan tolerated but never embraced. Her existence was a quiet threat, her bloodline a reminder of a past that refused to fade. The Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 changed everything. Henry Tudor's victory over Richard III birthed the Tudor dynasty, but it did not erase the Plantagenet legacy. Henry VII, acutely aware of the threat posed by surviving Plantagenets, kept a close eye on Margaret and her brother. Edward, now a teenager, remained imprisoned in the Tower, his mere existence a rallying point for Yorkist rebels. In 1487, a pretender named Lambert Simnel claimed to be Edward, sparking a rebellion that, though crushed, underscored the danger of the Plantagenet name. Henry VII, determined to neutralize this threat, ensured Edward would never taste freedom. In 1499, after years of confinement, Edward was executed on charges of treason, likely fabricated to eliminate a rival claim. Margaret, now in her mid-20s, had lost her last full-blooded kin. The Plantagenet name, once a symbol of power, was now a curse. With her family's legacy in tatters, Margaret's future rested in the hands of Henry VII. To neutralize her dangerous bloodline, he arranged her marriage to Sir Richard Pole, a loyal but unremarkable knight and distant cousin of the crown. The union was calculated. Richard's modest status ensured Margaret's royal heritage would not fuel rebellion. Yet, despite its political roots, the marriage was unexpectedly harmonious. Richard was steady, kind, and capable, rising to prominence in Henry's court as a trusted administrator. Together they had 5 children: Henry, Reginald, Geoffrey, Arthur, and Ursula, and for a time, Margaret found the stability that had eluded her childhood. Their life was not one of wealth, but it was grounded in mutual respect and purpose. This fragile peace shattered in 1504 when Richard died unexpectedly, leaving Margaret a widow at 31. With 5 young children and no income, she faced destitution, a stark fall for a woman of royal descent. To secure her son Reginald's future, she sent him to the church, a common path for noble sons without inheritance. This decision, born of necessity, would later ripple through history, shaping both their fates in ways Margaret could not foresee. The ascension of Henry VIII in 1509 marked a turning point for Margaret. The young king, eager to project magnanimity and secure loyalty, took an interest in her plight. In a bold move, he restored her to the peerage, granting her the title of Countess of Salisbury in her own right, a rare honor for a woman in the 16th century. The restoration came at a steep price of 5,000 marks, but it returned Margaret to prominence. She seized the opportunity, managing vast estates with acumen, forging alliances, and raising her children with quiet dignity. By 1538, she was among England's 5 wealthiest peers, a testament to her resilience and resourcefulness. The girl who had once been a royal outcast had become a formidable matriarch. Margaret's influence extended beyond her estates. She served as governess to Princess Mary, daughter of Henry VIII, and Catherine of Aragon, becoming a surrogate mother to the young princess. Her loyalty to Catherine and Mary was unwavering, rooted in shared faith and a deep sense of duty. When Henry's obsession with Anne Boleyn and his break with Rome sparked a religious and political earthquake, Margaret stood firm. She refused to comply with orders to surrender Mary's jewels and gold to Anne, defying the king's will to protect the princess she had raised. Her Catholic convictions and allegiance to the old order made her a quiet but resolute opponent of the Reformation sweeping England. While Margaret navigated the treacherous waters of Henry's court, her son Reginald emerged as a force of his own. Educated in Italy and ordained as a priest, he became a vocal critic of Henry's religious policies. From the safety of the continent, Reginald denounced the king's divorce from Catherine and his claim to supremacy over the church. His writings, circulated in Rome and beyond, called for European monarchs to overthrow Henry. In 1536, Pope Paul III named him a cardinal, a clear signal of his allegiance to the Vatican over England. Reginald's defiance was a direct challenge to Henry's authority, and it cast a long shadow over his mother. Henry VIII, never one to tolerate dissent, saw Reginald's actions as a personal betrayal. Worse, they came from a Plantagenet, a family whose very name stirred memories of rival claims. Even if Margaret herself remained silent, her son's rebellion tainted her by association. The king's patience, already thin, began to fray. In the autumn of 1538, whispers of a conspiracy known as the Exeter Plot began to circulate through Henry VIII's court, casting a dark shadow over Margaret Pole and her family. The plot, centered on allegations of treason, accused members of the Pole family, most notably Margaret's sons, Geoffrey and Henry, of orchestrating a plan to assassinate the king and overthrow his regime. The supposed goal was to restore a Catholic monarchy, potentially by marrying Margaret's son Reginald, a cardinal in Rome, to Princess Mary, Henry's daughter by Catherine of Aragon, thus securing a Plantagenet Tudor alliance to claim the throne. Whether this conspiracy was a genuine threat or a fabrication engineered by Henry's advisors remains a matter of historical debate. Many scholars argue that the plot was a convenient pretext, exaggerated or entirely invented, to eliminate the lingering threat of the Plantagenet bloodline. The evidence against the Poles was flimsy, resting heavily on a single dubious artifact, a tunic embroidered with the 5 holy wounds of Christ, a potent Catholic symbol associated with the Pilgrimage of Grace, a major Catholic uprising in 1536. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister and a ruthless architect of political purges, presented the tunic as proof of the Poles' seditious intent, claiming it signaled their support for rebellion and a Catholic restoration. However, the tunic's significance was speculative at best. Embroidered religious imagery was common among devout Catholics, and linking it to a grand conspiracy required a leap that many at court found unconvincing. The lack of concrete evidence, letters, witnesses, or explicit plans further undermined the case, suggesting that the accusations were driven more by political expediency than by truth. The investigation targeted Geoffrey Pole, Margaret's youngest son, who was arrested and subjected to brutal interrogation. Under intense pressure, likely including threats of torture or promises of leniency, Geoffrey broke, offering vague and inconsistent confessions that implicated himself, his brother Henry, and, indirectly, his mother. His statements, extracted under duress, were riddled with contradictions and lacked the specificity needed to substantiate a charge of treason. Yet in the paranoid atmosphere of Henry's court, where suspicion often outweighed evidence, these confessions were enough to condemn the family. The accusations painted the Poles as a dangerous clan, united by their Plantagenet heritage and Catholic loyalties, plotting to dismantle the Tudor dynasty. In November 1538, Margaret Pole, now approaching her 70th year, was arrested at her estate and transported to the Tower of London. Her son Henry and her young grandson, Henry's son, were also seized, their fates intertwined with hers. The Tower, a fortress synonymous with royal justice and retribution, became their prison, its damp stone walls a stark contrast to the wealth and influence Margaret had painstakingly rebuilt as Countess of Salisbury. The conditions of her confinement were harsh, particularly for a woman of her age and station. Stripped of her comforts and isolated from her allies, Margaret faced relentless interrogations designed to extract a confession of treason. Yet despite the pressure, she remained steadfast, denying any involvement in the alleged plot with a dignity that frustrated her captors. Margaret's interrogators, led by Cromwell's agents, sought to link her to the conspiracy through her son's actions or her own Catholic sympathies. They probed her loyalty to Princess Mary, her refusal to support Henry's break with Rome, and her connection to Reginald, whose outspoken defiance from Rome had enraged the king. But Margaret, a seasoned survivor of political turmoil, offered nothing to incriminate herself. Her silence was not merely a defense, but a rebuke of the injustice she faced. A woman of royal blood, accused without proof, imprisoned without trial. Her son Henry was less fortunate, lacking his mother's resilience or perhaps targeted as a more immediate threat. He was found guilty of treason based on Geoffrey's coerced testimony and the dubious evidence of the tunic. In January 1539, Henry Pole was executed, his death a devastating blow to Margaret, who remained confined in the Tower with her grandson. The loss of her son, coupled with the uncertainty of her own fate, tested her endurance, yet she clung to her faith and her resolve, refusing to bend to the will of a king who had once restored her honor. For over 2 years, from November 1538 to May 1541, Margaret languished in the Tower without a trial or formal charges. Her imprisonment was a deliberate act of attrition designed to break her spirit and erase her influence. At nearly 70, her health deteriorated under the strain of confinement. Cold winters, meager rations, and the psychological toll of isolation took their toll. Yet even in her frailty, Margaret's spirit remained unbroken. She maintained her dignity, praying, reflecting, and perhaps preparing for the inevitable. Her Plantagenet blood, which had once elevated her to the peerage, now marked her as a perpetual threat in the eyes of Henry VIII, whose paranoia grew with each passing year. The reasons for Margaret's prolonged detention without trial are complex. Henry may have hesitated to execute a woman of her stature, especially one with no clear evidence against her, fearing backlash from nobles or Catholic Europe. Alternatively, her imprisonment may have served as a warning to others with royal blood, a reminder that no one was beyond the king's reach. Reginald's continued defiance from Rome, where he rallied support for a Catholic crusade against Henry, likely fueled the king's animosity. Each of Reginald's pamphlets, each call for European intervention, tightened the noose around his mother's neck, even as she remained silent in her cell. On the morning of May 27th, 1541, the silence of Margaret's imprisonment was shattered by an abrupt and chilling order. Henry VIII had signed her death warrant. No explanation was given, no trial convened, no public proclamation issued to justify the sentence. The decision was as swift as it was opaque, possibly driven by Henry's desire to crush any lingering Plantagenet threat or to retaliate for Reginald's unrelenting opposition. Some historians speculate that the execution was timed to coincide with a period of political instability, serving as a stark message to potential rebels. Whatever the motive, the order was final, and Margaret's fate was sealed. At dawn, Margaret was led from her cell to a makeshift scaffold within the Tower's precincts, a departure from the public executions typically held at Tower Hill. The choice of a private execution may have reflected Henry's awareness of the act's illegitimacy. No trial, no evidence, no public support. Margaret, bewildered by the suddenness of her fate, remained resolute. She reportedly declared her innocence, stating that she had committed no crime and owed no allegiance to any plot against the king. No priest was present to offer last rites, a cruel omission for a devout Catholic, and no crowd gathered to witness her final moments, denying her the chance to address posterity. The execution itself was a horrific debacle. The executioner, described as a blundering youth with little experience, wielded his axe with neither skill nor precision. His first blow missed Margaret's neck, striking her shoulder, and subsequent strikes hacked at her back and head in a frenzy of violence. Contemporary accounts, though possibly embellished, suggest it took up to 11 blows to end her life, each strike prolonging her agony. Margaret, through sheer force of will, is said to have remained upright for much of the ordeal, her courage a final defiance against her tormentors. When she finally fell, her blood stained the scaffold, and the spectacle left even seasoned onlookers, guards and officials accustomed to Tudor executions, stunned by its brutality. News of Margaret's execution spread quickly, reaching her son Reginald in Rome, where he mourned her as a martyr to the Catholic faith. He declared himself the son of a martyr, a sentiment that resonated with Catholics across Europe, who saw Margaret's death as a symbol of Henry VIII's tyranny and the persecution of the faithful. Her execution, far from silencing the Plantagenet legacy, amplified it, transforming Margaret into a figure of tragic heroism. Her death underscored the precariousness of noble birth in a world where royal blood could be both a privilege and a death sentence. In 1886, over 3 centuries later, Pope Leo XIII beatified Margaret Pole, recognizing her as Blessed Margaret, a martyr of the Catholic Church. The honor was not solely for her gruesome death, but for the life she led, a life marked by integrity, resilience, and unwavering faith in the face of relentless adversity. Margaret had navigated the treacherous currents of Tudor politics, outlived kings, and rebuilt her family's legacy from the ashes of disgrace, only to be felled by the very bloodline that defined her. History often reduces Margaret Pole to her tragic end, a footnote in the bloody saga of Henry VIII's reign. Yet her life was a testament to endurance and courage. She was a woman who rose from the ruins of her family's fall to become one of England's wealthiest and most respected peers, a matriarch who faced betrayal, loss, and imprisonment with unyielding strength. As the last prominent Plantagenet, she was feared not for her deeds, but for the potent symbolism of her heritage, a bloodline that even in death refused to be erased. Margaret's story, etched in the annals of history, serves as a haunting reminder of the cost of power and the indomitable spirit of those who defy it.